There are more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Welcome, our friends, Sobs Not Snobs, Sense of Beer Style show, and your friendly host, Julia and Jeremy, here on this excellent day. Nice to see you, Jeremy.
Nice to see you too, Julia. Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be a fun one.
It is going to be a fun one, whether you're watching or listening, no matter where your lens is to beer, why you found your way to the show will differ. Some of you are brewing these beers. Some of you are buying these beers for a retail establishment. Some of them, obviously, we're all hopefully buying them for ourselves. Some of us are constructing recipes for these beers. Some of us are judging these beers. And so we're going to take you through spiced beer. That is where we're at today. And as part of the 2021 Beer Judge Certification Program guidelines, spiced beer has 4 styles of beer within the category of spiced beer. So my first piece of advice is spices, think of it as a very general, broad term. Spice in terms of the 4 subcategories or 4 styles within the category include spices, and we'll talk about what those really mean, herbs, vegetables, and then that's spice, herb, and vegetable is our first style. Then you've got autumn seasonal beer. Then you've got winter seasonal beer. Then you've got specialty spice beer. And that's really more about not just the spices or the herbs or vegetables, but also additional sugar fermentables and or ingredient additions that layer on to that beer style.
Yeah.
So it's a lot, but it's fun.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things I love about the BJCP is it gets so detailed. And this is why we use it for not only this podcast, but also we use it to study the beer styles within Cicerone and beyond. And a lot of people from around the world, different competitions rely on the BJCP because there's such specificity. And I love that. Now, this particular category, if someone were to ask me and I were trying to be kind of honest, it's like, maybe we're splitting hairs on this one. So I think that's why we're going to talk about this as one general category. But let's talk about what kind of ingredients would you expect to see to fit within this category if you're trying to homebrew this and submit this in for judging, or a commercial brewer trying to submit this in for a competition. But just to kind of wrap our head around what it is we're talking about when we talk about these beers. Now, granted, if you have like a wit beer that has coriander, well, that's not going to fit within this category because that is a set category in and of itself. These are for the beers where you have your general base beer, but we've added some sort of spice or herb or vegetable that is not typically in a beer. Now, Julia, you are a prolific home brewer. I've homebrewed a few beers in my day as well. These are perfect. I've brewed beer with coffee. I've brewed beer with coconut. I've brewed beer with rosemary, vanilla bean, and all of those home brews, all of those beers you might find commercially, if they've got something along those lines, that isn't a typical fruit when you think of the culinary version of fruit. We talked about that in a different Stylecast. But if you think about those spices, cinnamon, vanilla bean, herbs, and vegetables, like we just mentioned, that's kind of what this general category is for. When we get into the autumn seasonal beer, well, we're thinking like fall, we're thinking Thanksgiving, we're thinking there's lots of things we could add to that, but really we're thinking pumpkin, we're thinking allspice, we're thinking clove, we're thinking cinnamon, we're thinking brown sugar, and stuff like that. When we get into the winter seasonal beer, we're thinking Christmas. I've brewed a beer with peppermint syrup and orange peel and cinnamon, and that was very Christmassy. And even for those countries and cultures that don't celebrate Christmas, this is still kind of like that winter spice beer. And when we get into finally that specialty spice beer, that really is just adding some sort of sugar adjunct to the already spice, herb, or vegetable beer category. And that's kind of how these subcategories break out. Um, when we start getting something like this, Julia, what do you expect to? Is there like a theme that we can, or a pattern that we can see when you look at stuff like this? Anything that stands out different?
Sure. I want to get into that. And I also want to emphasize real quick on the inclusive nature of winter seasonal beer, because saying a
Mm,
Christmas beer, I mean, not everybody celebrates Christmas. I would love to
yeah,
see that even named more of the holiday seasonal beer, right?
yeah,
And they specifically talk about the Christmas holiday season in the description there. I would keep it non-religious and just call it the holiday season.
yeah.
Um, so to your question, it this is such a fun category because it gives the brewer, and I'm thinking of examples for spice, herb, or vegetable beer, like listed in the guidelines, AleSmith Speedway Stout. I was
Yeah,
personally just in San Diego, personally at AleSmith Brewing,
great
personally
brewery.
drinking Speedway Stout, personally partaking one of the original pioneer craft brewers in the US. And what did they do? They took the base style of stout, and it's a variant of stout because there's so many types of stouts, but don't worry about that. And adding the coffee creates it to then be considered in these guidelines spice, herb, or vegetable beer. So the reason I bring that up is because the category, and it says this in the introduction, explicitly includes all culinary spices, herbs, and vegetables, as well as nuts. It can include coconut, chili peppers, coffee, chocolate, spruce tips, rose hips, hibiscus, fruit peel zest, rhubarb, and the like. So that's really good to know. And it also emphasizes it did not include culinary fruit or grains. That's
Hmm.
taken care of in another place of the style guidelines, for example, category 29 for grape ale. So you think of AleSmith Speedway Stout in your mind as having coffee. Just think Speedway, right? Fast. So they've like amped up, pumped up the volume with caffeine and flavor and color with coffee addition. And then that's a great example commercial wise if you ever have to share one for spice, herb, or vegetable beer. I also do think of Elysian Avatar Jasmine IPA, right? Jasmine IPA, adding jasmine flowers to
Really
a
interesting beer. Yeah,
standard IPA. That's what this is all really about. So that's just kind of an anchor and a start. And I know that we kind of already quickly higher level with what Jeremy shared, kind of spoke what those each of the styles within this category are about. So I think it's fair to really kind of work our way through clunkily, admittedly, the
yeah,
aroma, appearance, flavor, mouthfeel, etc. But sometimes we're going to cheat, just like the style guidelines do, because there's such a wide breadth of if you're using any base style and there's 100 plus, of course the aroma is going to vary, the appearance is going to vary, the flavor will vary, the mouthfeel will vary, and it also depends on what herb, spice, or vegetable you've added. So that's how I think we should do it, Jeremy, if you're game. And we usually basically start with appearance.
yeah. And just a little tagline. You just mentioned a couple things. At some point we'll get into the commercial examples, but notice in the commercial examples, everything that we're going to talk about, the first answer is going to be it varies. And so
Hmm.
there we can't really pin it down. If you look at the commercial examples, we've got stout, we've got IPA, we've got pilsner, it's all over the board. So it's really hard to pin this one down. But let's just talk about what kind of patterns would we see in some of these beers.
Yep.
You want
So
to,
I've tossed
yeah, let's
you
talk about
appearance, your
yeah.
appearance.
Oh, so appearance. Then really, it's going to be variable, but it's going to be dependent on what we put in the beer. For example, if you put coconut in the beer, the coconut is very oily and has this uh, beautiful kind of oil that comes through, but it can destroy the foam. If you put coffee in there, you can it depends on what you put in there. So the color it is like, for example, I've got a coffee blonde, and if you look at this, it's actually a little bit darker than most blondes because we added something to it. So keep in mind that whatever is in there is going to affect how it appears. And we could say the same thing with aroma and flavor. Do you want to tap your foot on
Well,
those bases?
I'll take a practical approach to buttoning up the appearance description, because if you're studying for testing, Cicerone, BJCP, any of the tests, you want on appearance, your brain should say spice, herb, or vegetable beer. It varies based on style and special ingredients, as
Yeah.
well as specialty spice ale. But in the guidelines for autumn seasonal beer and winter seasonal beer for appearance, they are a little different. Autumn seasonal beer, medium amber to coppery brown. Winter seasonal beer for appearance would be medium amber to very dark brown. And then there's some more nuance in there. So it's good to kind of share those distinctions. And then we get to aroma. And so the emphasis is on varies based on style, just like the specialty spice beer. And then if you get aroma for autumn and compare that to winter, they are going to be different, right? Because it's different things going into your autumn type of fall beers. Think pumpkin pie compared to fruitcake, which is your winter seasonal spice mix. So
Hmm.
those are the differences there on aroma. In aroma for autumn seasonal, you're looking for those for it to evoke notions of eating pumpkin pie, but in a glass while you're drinking it. And then winter seasonal, you're looking for that spicy, fruity, fruitcake, holiday themed type of aroma. And there is some allowance for, hops and alcohol. We haven't gotten into the vitals, but you might get a sense of ethanol from all four of these, obviously in the aroma. But also it depends on the base style for the first one, spice, herb, and veggie beer, and the last one, specialty spice beer. Autumn seasonal beer and winter seasonal beer, I think it's fair to say it's interesting because the style guidelines talk about basically 5% or more for autumn. And then winter seasonal, it's random to me. The style guidelines talk about basically 6% ABV or more. So very different nuance. And then aroma obviously leads you to flavor.
Yeah, and with flavor, and we can even throw this in with aroma too. Is we're adding these spices or herbs or vegetables, but it should not come across in an artificial way. It should still taste like beer with this extra flavor. So granted, you've got to know your base style first. You have to understand it's going to be variable dependent on even different breweries, even the same brewery who brews multiple pumpkin beers. Even those beers are going to be a little bit different. But just understand that when you taste it, if it's a pumpkin ale, if it's a vanilla bean beer, that you should have some of that character come through. In another Stylecast we talked about fruit beers. I mentioned having a coconut dunkel or a jackfruit Kolsch, and those particular beers were not very strong with that fruit flavor. I want to see if it's going to be a spice or herb or vegetable beer. I want a little bit of enough of that character to come through where I know what that flavor is, but it shouldn't be too much where it just is just strange. It should still be beer. Other than that, when we get, you just mentioned this beautifully. I'm going to say what Julia said when it comes to that autumn seasonal beer. Uh, we're looking for those flavors that we think about with fall: caramel, toast, nuts, molasses, maple, brown sugar, Maillard type flavors. That kind of the the flavors that make you feel good when it's starting to get cold. When we get
Yes.
into that winter, that holiday seasonal, and even after winter, you mentioned it as well too. We tend to see a little bit of spike in alcohol going up because when it's cold, we want to warm up, and that kind of helps give us that sense. But we're looking for dried fruits, brown sugar, gingerbread, eggnog. I brewed a beer with peppermint in it, and that was just a beautiful, beautiful flavor. And we're going to start seeing stuff like that more in that winter seasonal beer. Um, when we get into that specialty spice, we start adding some different kinds of sugars. If we have brown sugar or turbinado or maple syrup, stuff like that, not only is that going to affect the color, but after that's fermented, the sugar's fermented, we're still going to have some of that residual flavor that might make you think maple. And so that's another little aspect to keep in mind when we get into that specialty spice beer is it's going to add a flavor, it's going to add color, it's going to add some character, and it's really wonderful. What do you think happens when we add all this stuff, Julia? What happens to the mouthfeel just across the board?
Yeah, and you alluded to it a little bit where mouthfeel is going to be affected by spices that are added.
Yeah,
It brings increased astringency and tannins to the table, some spices. It also could increase a sense of oiliness, as Jeremy was saying, so it'll affect the
yeah,
body. It will lessen the cholera foam if you're adding some kind of ingredient that's got some oil component to it. So I'm thinking that again, it varies based on style, and spice, herb, and vegetable beer for mouthfeel are pretty similar in saying that compared to specialty spice beer, which also says that. But for autumn seasonal beer on mouthfeel, what I love to note, and that's very similar to winter seasonal beer, is that body is usually medium to full, and they make an emphasis in the guidelines for both these substyles, autumn seasonal and winter seasonal, that age character is allowable. That's pretty cool. Age character will lessen mouthfeel, frankly, increase certain things in flavor and decrease or negate other things in flavor. So the age aspect of autumn seasonal and winter seasonal beers is kind of a trend, right? I mean, Jeremy, you probably get handed or have seen or judged or tasted a bunch of pumpkin beers, for example, or winter seasonal
hmm
beers that are aged. They're cellared, they're laid
yeah.
down. But most spice, herb, and vegetable beers or specialty spice beers that I've had are meant to be drink fresh. And I'm not trying to script it. You could certainly make one that's cellarable and meant to be laid down and cellared. But the trends are first one, last one, very similar. And then the middle two, autumn and winter, also are similar, but they allow for age.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like for example, that autumn seasonal beer, if we're making a pumpkin ale, well, pumpkins are going to start growing and become available kind of at the beginning of fall, but they're going to take those, they're going to toast them, they're going to put them in the beer, and so that they're available by middle to late fall. And so there's a little bit of like, hey, we have these seasonal ingredients, we need to put them in the beer now. The other aspect too is, like you said, if we're going to lay this down, I've had a pumpkin ale that was aged on rum barrels, and it was absolutely beautiful. And I'm not a big lover of pumpkin ales, to be honest, but this was absolutely beautiful. Well, they made that the year prior, laid it down for an entire year, and then released it. And so that's a kind of a different approach, and it was fantastic. There's I don't think there's a lot of benefit to talking about style comparisons. We're talking about the base beer with different ingredients. Julia, you already mentioned a few commercial examples to look out for. I'd say we kind of go back and forth and just talk about some of our favorites that we've had just to kind of tap our foot in that base.
Yeah, I like that. And commercial examples for spice, herb, or vegetable beer. Jeremy is acknowledging that I had brought up AleSmith Speedway Stout,
Yeah.
Elysian, Avatar Jasmine IPA. I mean, Founder's Breakfast Stout is talked about frequently. It really set the tone for a lot of what people were seeking out there in these more advanced beers. Rogue Yellow Snow Pilsner is fine, and
Oh,
Rogue still has game. They're still
I
doing
look
what they
forward to
do,
that every year.
right?
Every year.
And then one of the specialty imports, I mean, certainly granted, we skew to US domestic slant, apologies and allowances, please. But Young's Double Chocolate Stout was always one of those imports that I would look for, especially during testing situations or where I wanted to calibrate. And that's a really fun one with the addition of chocolate. I would
And
say
that Triquare Jacobite ale is one of my all-time favorites. That's in my top 10. And so, yeah, that's another one that's fantastic.
that's an incredible testament from Jeremy. Wow. So put that one on your list, y'all.
Yeah.
And autumn seasonal really blew my mind. And this for BJCP guidelines, Brewers Association guidelines, certainly those are the guidelines I'm personally most familiar with, has gone through evolutions. But the beer that set the tone, and two of them are listed,
Mhm.
Dogfish Head Punkin, Punkin ale. There's even a festival Dogfish has after this. They literally are shotgunning pumpkins into the air and really, shooting them and blowing them up, and it's just a fun blast of a way and to celebrate the
Pun
season.
intended.
And these beers are absolutely cellarable. If you see one of those, first of all, sit down for a while if you're drinking two, or even finish one bottle on your own, because it's a boozy big one. It's super fun. And then, I think about Schlafly Pumpkin Ale, which is more sessionable. That's the first pumpkin ale besides the Dogfish one, which was polar opposite, so much bigger. But the Schlafly one, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not pumpkin pie in a glass. It's more like about the pumpkin. Because at the end of the day, when you're fermenting squash, you're fermenting pumpkin, you're fermenting gourds, right? These other things, it's more of just a fermentable unless you really work to have that fermentable, that vegetable showcased in the flavor. It's a sugar source. So I loved having Schlafly pumpkin ale, which was a little lighter on the spicing than most other pumpkin ales I've had. And it blows my mind. If they're still making it, go out and seek that one out, I would say.
Yeah. When we get into some of the winter beers, anything that says winter warmer on it is going to be fantastic and is going to likely fit in this category. Hopefully Anchor comes back to life and puts their Christmas ale out again. That was something that was kind of iconic, and everyone looked forward to. Great Lakes Christmas Ale, Harpoon Winter Warmer. Again, Rogue is all over this list because they loved to play and defy styles. But the Santa's Private Reserve, that is a fantastic beer to have in the all throughout the winter. And of course, Schlafly's in there again, and Trogs, the Mad Elf. I mean, these are beers that we see all the time in the winter months.
Yes, on an annual basis. I'll make a note
Yes.
to add to what you just shared. Winter seasonal beers are so coveted that when they're released, get people to drive to Great Lakes to get their Christmas ale, and they're happy to
Mhm.
walk out with a 6-pack. These are beers that get you to the liquor store because you just found your better beer provider actually has a few cases, or you go to the brewery because these are seasonal, right? They are one and done. They don't make these year round
Yeah.
usually. And so that's a really important aspect of when you see them, it's going to go. So get them and buy them, and then wait for the next year to try to compare it. If you are going to lay them down, it's fun to do kind of vertical tastings of several years in a row of Anchor Christmas Ale, right? I've certainly done that. I have a
Yeah.
poster in my office of Anchor Christmas Ales and the labels each year, and they always change the spicing. It's not the same beer every time. There's terroir to that beer, and there's a different approach. So that's a good one to note, that spice herb and vegetable beer, those are everyday beers that are great, that are brewed year round. And the autumn and seasonal beer and winter seasonal beer, the word seasonal is in there for a reason.
Yeah. We're not going to spend our time talking about vital stats. It's all going to be dependent on the base style and everything else. So variable is the theme for this particular style cast. But when we're drinking a beer like this, what kind of glass would you typically like to drink out of?
I am not a pint glass girl. I use it for my water, and it was made for shaking cocktails. And I always talk about, one of my best posts on craftbeer.com was, should the shaker pint glass go away? And there's reasons to ask that question. It's certainly a pedestrian and productive glass, but I don't want to drink them out of pint glasses. And to me, the answer is easy, and you all will have your answers. The higher alcohol by volume, the smaller the glass, right? That's just
Yeah.
where I'm going to go. And then the warmer the temperature I would want it served at, the higher the alcohol. Easy
Yeah.
answer.
Perfect rule of thumb. Darker, stronger, a little bit warmer. And I think a snifter, especially for those winter warmers that are a little bit stronger, perfect. But pairing suggestions. I mean, variable is still the theme of the stuff. But Julie, you're the queen of beer pairing. What are some of your favorite pairings that you've had with some of these spice, herb, and vegetable beers?
I mean, it's anybody's guess at how you want to approach a meal, a time, a moment, a season, right? So, seasonally, it'd be super fun to have an autumn seasonal beer tasting paired with fun autumn seasonal foods, right? I mean, my garden in the fall is at the tail end of producing. My early season greens are gone. I'm getting those gourds and squashes. I'm getting the last of, harvesting beets, right? So it's, to me, if you were going to do an autumn seasonal beer pairing, you want to pair it with what you are harvesting from the garden or getting at the last few farmers markets before they close down for the season, and just have a fun field day. It doesn't have to be a strategic meal. It could literally be just a palate trip tasting. That to me is several beers and then several food elements on a plate. It's not a meal per se. And then the winter seasonal beer, I love the notion of kind of those holiday ales, that fruitcake, right? An Anchor
Mhm.
Christmas ale, it gets a little bit more forest than fruitcakey on the herbs and spices that they tend to use over the years. But I would love to serve that as a warm up to my holiday meal, right? It's the holidays, y'all. Y'all are over for dinner. Y'all over for, late midday brunch, whatever it is. And I'm going to put in your hand winter seasonal beer, and then you're going to enjoy it and see where it works with all the precursor to the meal type of foods, your charcuteries, your cheeses, what bread, crackers, jams, and jellies do I have out? What kind of nuts do I have out? And so that to me is like a welcome beer, and it's going to warm people up. My stomach literally is warming as I speak about this, because high ABV beers, if you haven't had a meal and your palate is peaked and you're hungry, you're peaked, you're going to feel the warming effect of that alcohol. So I like it as a warm welcome, and then maybe the finishing beer too after the meal.
Yeah, and that's a great way to think about it. Is you go to a holiday party, whether it's early fall to late winter, but if you go to some sort of party, there's usually we're going to have appetizers or snacks and a meal and a dessert and several beers. I love to think about what it is I plan on eating, what the mood is. I love to think about how I want my experience to go. I've the power of the experiences in my hands. If I'm hungry and I'm starting with a winter warmer or something that's going to kick it off, well, I need some food in my belly because I don't want to get to the end of my night before my night's over, if you know what I mean. Um, but so just be mindful of the flavors, be mindful of the season. This is a good example of that which grows together, goes together kind of mentality, but that which celebrates together usually pairs well. If we're talking pumpkin, then, hey, Thanksgiving is fantastic. Uh, um, Put it with some chocolate. We've got the pumpkin in our beer. Let's put some chocolate on our plate and play with that. If we're talking about something a little bit more winter seasonal and stronger and brooding, maybe we have some nuts, maybe we have some dry cheeses, maybe we have a fireplace and a big ugly sweater party. Just have some fun with this and let your palate be your guide.
Yep. Last thought is more tannins in something, in a beverage, the more it might help balance against fat, rich, denser
Yeah.
foods. So spices and herbs and the skin from vegetables is going to bring tannins. So if you've got more tannins, you can play with that to your advantage and go for heavier, richer foods as well.
Yeah. So this is not a time for a diet. Right?
No, it's the holidays, right? Or it's
It's the
autumn.
holidays.
Who cares?
Yeah. So enjoy the beer and just go out and just have some fun.
Yeah. Be well, everybody. Appreciate you, and cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
And me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.